Hello. Well, quite a few little things have happened since we last spoke. I'm just going to spend 2 minutes on the Spurgatron situation, and then I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about, which is actually quite a lot more interesting. So just so you know, good old Jay Dyer and I will be having a debate at the prompting of Vox a little bit, and his ankle biters, which have been bugging me to debate him for a while now. I had no interest in Jay Dyer, none whatsoever, but I kept getting pestered about him, so I went to watch some of his videos, and well, I watched in total a grand total of I think less than an hour, about 5 minutes of one video and about 40 minutes of the video that we're going to be debating on. And well, all I can say is, you know, the debate will solve it, but it's quite interesting the level of my gamma graves are getting filled up. My mass graves of gammas are getting filled up quite fast. So, and Jay himself, of course, lost his shit and spurged all over my channel with like over a dozen comments. You know, it's just really quite entertaining, I gotta say. So we'll see whether he'll be able to hold his shit together or lose it when we do debate eventually, which will probably be on the weekend, just because I've got a lot of shit on. I'm not going to get a chance to have an hour or two or whatever to do the debate. The format, I believe, has more or less been agreed in terms of you know, the time to present your case and the time to rebuttal and all that. So I think that's in hand, and it's going to be on the Ralph retort. So Ethan Ralph is going to be looking after it and moderating it, which I'm very grateful for, because I do think it will need moderation. Jay quite clearly doesn't strike me as somebody who can control himself, so I hope he'll be able to either mute or, you know, give us the time that we've decided on, and let that be that. So I will be arguing purely dialectically, unless, you know, the debate descends into flat out insults and rhetoric, then I'm sure I can best him there too, because I'm pretty quick-witted. But otherwise it'll be purely on the merits of his video or lack thereof. And that's that. So I'm not sure when that will happen. I expect it'll probably be like towards the end of the week or so, but we'll see. You know, I've only got so much free time, and I'm guessing so does Jay Dyer, so probably we'll the weekend will probably, the Saturday would probably be best for me. So if we can do it, then I'm not going to get a chance really to do any reading or whatever, but it doesn't matter. I've done the bits that I need to do with respect to his video that according to him sedevacantism proves orthodoxy. Well, it doesn't, but anyway, we'll leave that for the debate. What I wanted to talk about was something quite different, and something that I find quite interesting, which is some of the discoveries of the conquistadors in South America. And a guy that I found particularly interesting is Captain Francisco de Orellana, or to give his full name, Francisco de Orellana Bejarano Pizarro y Torres de Altamirano. So, one of those longish Spanish names. He was born in Trujillo, and he's the first guy to essentially navigate the entire length of the Amazon River, which for a time was called Rio de Orellana, which is Spanish for the River of Orellana. This book, it's not easy to come by, but there you go. If you're interested in his story, it's this. Now keep in mind, this book is a recounting of the trip, because the trip was diarized. They had a monk who lost an eye, if I remember right, in one of the fights. They had a monk with them, a priest, that recorded the journey and what happened. He was kind of a chronicler. And there are a couple of accounts in the original Spanish from the time when this happened, which was you know, when he was I'm trying to get the date, east of Quito, South American interior. So it must have been 1540 something, 41, 42. He died quite young. He died in November of 1546, aged 34, 35. And the expedition of the Amazon River that he did was Napo Orellana contingent downstream to the Amazon. He started out with 49 men. These guys, they started out with 300 natives. Look, you can Google him and you'll get the Wikipedia stuff. But if you're really interested, I suggest you get this book. It's really good because it's got the translated. There are two original documents, and quite a lot of the book is spent on detailing minutely. I would say to almost an autistic level of detail. The history of the documents and which one is more accurate and how a name is spelled. There's quite a lot of that. The actual book itself, composed from mostly one of the documents, but some bits that were thought to be more accurate from the other document do come in, or there's notes to it. So there you go. So up to here, the book is divided into different sections. I just want to show you because it is quite interesting, but I don't want, it's quite a difficult book to find. It probably won't be very cheap. So I just don't want you guys to, waste money or time if it's not in a way that makes sense to you. So part one, the introduction by one of the researchers, just so you know, you've got the introduction lasts for 160 plus pages. Then you've got Carjaval's account, which is another roughly 160 pages again. And then you've got part three, the documents, which last for page 245 through to page 374, so another 130 or so. And then you've got an appendix which goes on for another 60 odd pages, 60, 70 pages. So the actual documents relating to the diary are really, you've got Carjaval's account, and then you've got this thing about the documents that are related. The actual account itself is, roughly speaking, is from page 167 to page 236. So, out of a book of that size, the actual account is, let me just show you. There we go. Did I get the page numbering wrong? That's a bit weird. Saying page 137, right? Did I read that wrong? No, sorry, 167. I didn't read it wrong. So there you go, from here to there. So this section in the middle that I'm holding together, that's the actual account. So it's a lot of commentary at the beginning, and then the details of the documents that form the account in the back, plus an appendix and so on. I read most of the introduction, but then it became so detailed. I was like, let me just read the original document. And they go to great length, really, which I think is a good thing, to show that the account is made from the original documents and where it was sourced from and how, and whether this word was translated properly or not. They go to an almost beyond the Call of Duty, let's say. But it's a very interesting account because what these guys did and achieved is astonishing. Like most of the conquistador stories, the Spaniards were extremely tough. I mean, the priest that was writing the account lost an eye from an arrow shot at them by the indigenous people, and it's like one line in his diary. It's like, oh, I lost an eye today. It's quite painful. We're carrying on. And then it doesn't even get mentioned again. It's like, fucking hell, can you imagine one of us loses an eye? You'd be bitching about it every day. Oh, I got a fever, oh fuck. These guys were so tough, and they rebuilt boats. As they were going down, their boats got damaged and attacked, and it's just, again, if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, this is like reading kind of one of those crazy Dungeons and Dragons adventures, but it really happened. And one of the very interesting things is that they apparently got attacked at one point by a group of Amazons and so-called Amazonian women that were like apparently also white. So it's quite interesting, and there's talk of this white city, this giant white city where they came from far away and so on. And it's been a little bit of a myth, and that is why it's now you also have to understand that while we have a rough idea of where this encounter happened, the Amazon is huge. Brazil is a gigantic country. You can get on a plane in Brazil, fly for 6 hours, and you're still in the same country. It's vast. And the river also moves with time over the centuries and decades. The river, the Amazon River, moves. You get different sandbanks, you get different islands. It's a huge river, so unless I'm wrong, I believe it's the largest river in the world, unless I'm mistaken. There are still tribes in the Amazon that have had very little contact with modern people, but it's very interesting to me that clearly we still don't know everything that was in this place. It's not the only account, but there are other accounts of several people obviously believe that the that the native people clearly had a pretty large network of villages and cities and so on. And they fought each other, and some of the tribes were just instantly hostile and would try and kill you off. What I found really interesting also was Captain Orellana's qualities of leadership. He was obviously a very bright tactician. I'm not sure that he was a good strategist, so I relate to him quite a lot, because just going downstream on a river that you don't know where it ends, and you've got really no way back because you're just going with the current of the river, which is gets discussed in the account, is probably not the wisest thing to do, but that's what he did. And he succeeded, and he survived. He died shortly afterwards, possibly of complications or whatever, but I don't remember how he died, actually. I don't know if I know. I don't know if it's in the book. I'm sure it's in the book. I don't remember. But just some of the decisions he made at some of the villages they arrived and so on, it was really interesting. As I was reading the account, I was trying to think, what would it be like? What would it be like to be there and to be that guy? And plus you've got the responsibility of all these men, and some of them are pretty young. Men die, they get wounded, you have to rebuild the ship while it's getting attacked by Indians. It's just like the amount of incredible duress they go under. It's really something. And there is still this myth of that's where the sort of myth of the Amazons to a certain extent also comes from, because the Amazons are discussed in I can't remember if it's in the Iliad, the Odyssey, or Plato, one of those guys. I can't remember if it's Homer. I think it's Homer, or maybe Plato in one of his things. I can't remember. But Orellana found something that he was also ridiculed about it, and some people claimed, I think there was even court cases about it, where his men said no, this happened, but they weren't believed. They thought they were trying to just write a big story that makes news, I guess. On balance, I tend to believe that they probably did meet this tribe of where there was women warriors. It's not quite the tribe of only women missing the left breast, so they could shoot bows. It's not like that. But there is definitely a description of these women that are quite large, seem to be mostly white-skinned, and fight alongside the men, and seem to be sort of maybe even the leaders or the lieutenants or something during the fight. So it's a very interesting story. I read it a while ago, so I'm just doing this from memory, which is why it's a bit sketchy, but a very interesting story, and something that, if some random millionaire out there wants to sponsor a crazy guy to go look for this white city, I'm up for it. I just don't have the money for it, but if if you're a millionaire out there that wants to sponsor these kind of crazy things, I've got a number of these Indiana Jones type things that I want to do. One of them been on the books for a while. It's just I don't know whether it's worth doing anymore or not. I have to think about it. But anyway, so that's sort of my little video for today, is on the discovery of the Amazon and the so-called White City, and a little tribute to Captain Orellana, which was a very interesting character. Francisco de Orellana. He was, I can't remember, I think he was born in Trujillo, same as Pizarro. He's got Pizarro in the name, and I can't remember if he's has some relation to actual Francisco Pizarro. So I can't remember, I'm just quickly reading here, but I can't remember. He sided with Pizarro anyway in some of the battles and so on. So they were probably at least cousins or something, I can't remember. But yeah, it's, if you're interested in a bit of history and interesting history, there was a really brilliant book which I had, but I don't know. It's I read it when I was 16. I kept it because it was very interesting. I think it might be at my father's place if I still have it, or maybe it got lost or sent. I've given away many books, and unfortunately some of my family have given away many of my books. So I don't know where it is, but it was called Conquistadors. It had a red cover with, I think, a helm, a Spanish helmet, and a sword on the front, if I remember right. And it was a fascinating book. It was one of the first times I read about the Conquistadors, and it's just incredible what those guys did. And although I was raised in the classical sort of the evil Spanish conquistadors enslaved the poor, vegan, carbon-friendly natives, it's not quite like that. I mean, the carbon-friendly vegan natives used to kill up to 20,000 people a day to sacrifice them to the sun god. They had extremely vicious practices of sports, sports where men got killed, slaves were killed. And if you watch the film Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, brilliant film, all the violent shit that happens in that film is historically based. That really did take place. The so-called games where the slaves get slaughtered, that is a real thing. That really happened. That is something they used to do. So it's a brilliant movie. It's really worth watching it. And it has a twist right at the end, of course, which I found very powerful. And I'm not going to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it. But yeah. So, looking at things like that in a historical context over a few hundred years later, it certainly gives you a perspective on a lot of things, including Catholicism, Christianity, Catholicizing to the world, civilizing the world. And, of course, whenever you make omelets, you're going to break eggs. But it's nevertheless fascinating men, really. The men who did this, the men who conquered South America. I mean, Pizarro conquered practically a continent with 13 men. Sure, they had the advantages that they were thought of as the returning gods to a certain extent, but the toughness of these characters, the perseverance, and their faith was astonishing. So it's just interesting. And that's an interesting book which most people don't know anything about. So once again, it's called The Discovery of the Amazon. It's edited by Jose Torbillo Medina. There's the cover again. It's an old book. You can probably get it through 8 Books or something like that. I don't know if it's on Kindle, if it's been digitized or anything like that, but it's obviously not going to be cheap if you get it in paper format, because I don't think there is a current reprint. But very interesting book anyway. There you go. That's what I want to talk about today. So have a good day, and I'll see you soon.